over Psalm 51, and if you recall, I made a kind of a big deal about the phrase when David said, "Against you and you only have I sinned." First time I read that, I'm thinking, I'll bet Bathsheba and Uriah would object to that. Certainly feel like they sinned against me. But I think what David is emphasizing here is that all sin starts when we turn our back on God. Yes, it involves other people, and yes, we hurt other people when we do that. But first and foremost, we need to remember that we are sinning against God. So it was when she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside. And she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. And so it was when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, "See, he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened when he heard it, and I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until his master came home." What do you see in the phrase in verse 14? See, he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. Why is she pointing out he's a Hebrew?
Lower class.
Racism. In America, we hear racism, we tend to think of it in a narrow sense, and I understand why we do. I'm not complaining that we do, but racism is broader than that. All kinds of people don't like other people just because they are who they are. Racism can be very equal opportunity, let's put it that way. The other thing that jumps out at me is, what do they say about a woman scorned? She's got a pride hurt, not used to not getting her way. And so she immediately attacks him and uses the word Hebrew basically as a racial slur. So obviously, by him leaving his garment in there, he has made it easy for her to make this charge. Verse 17. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, "The Hebrew servants whom you brought to us came in to mock me. So it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. So Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison." Stop right there for a minute. Anything jump out at you in verse 20? All right, let me put it this way. The sentence? Anything about the sentence jump out at you? Yeah, what was you going to say, Stan? You can kill him. He's a Hebrew. He's a slave. Just been accused of trying to rape the guy's wife. Why does he put him in prison rather than kill him? I'm glad that came from a woman. So I didn't have to make it. Yes, when you're married to somebody, you get to know them pretty well. And he probably knows he can't trust her as far as he can throw her. Probably does. Now, on the other hand, still his wife, going to please her. So he's not, it looks to me like he's caught in between both worlds, which is, my wife said this happened, but I know who my wife is, and I know who she's accused, and it doesn't match up. And so I've got a sneaky suspicion that if he had mercy on him, it was probably one part, it did me a lot of good. And oh, by the way, if he also noticed that Joseph, everything Joseph touched was blessed, I don't want to put him away. Yeah, my life is better when he's around. So I imagine you have all of these factors that are factoring into this. One part, his own prosperity. One part, he knows his wife. One part, he knows Joseph. But anyways, I would have assumed he would have him put to death if he truly believed in his core that that's exactly how it went down. But I'm not so sure he did believe. But if you notice, in verse 2 it said the Lord was with Joseph. Here we go again. Verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. And he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's hand because the Lord was with him. Third time. Whatever he did, the Lord made it to prosper. One of the interesting things in Joseph's life that is missing is what would certainly be there if it had happened to me. What's Joseph not have that I would have certainly had? Favored son before he got sold into slavery. Does the phrase spoiled child mean anything, anybody? You know what spoiled children are famous for when you cut them off? They whine and complain. Life's not fair. I don't deserve this. On and on and on it goes. None of that seems to have happened in Joseph's life. He conducts himself honorably in all situations. He should have never been sold into Egyptian slavery, yet he seems to conduct himself in a most honorable and upright fashion. By the way, Charles, are we online? Okay. Not sure what's going on with the computer, but Charles says we're online, so grateful to have you on board. But anyways, then he gets put in prison, even though he's innocent. And yet he does not seem to complain about his lot, even in prison. And God seems to keep blessing him. But, you know, this is one of the great stories to remember when we think of, you know, sometimes we go through seasons of adversity, and sometimes we go through seasons of adversity, and if we're honest with ourselves, we'll say, you know, well, I contributed to my own misery. But sometimes things happen to us that are totally beyond our control. We didn't do anything wrong, and in fact, Joseph did everything right, and you still find yourself in difficult times. And yet, God is with him. God is with him in slavery. God is with him in prison. Yeah, Stan?
Joseph seems to be positive than all the people around him.
And it's going to get even more, that will be even more revealed as we move forward. I think it's in chapter 45, but I can't remember the verses off the top of my head. But Joseph has a way of, and Daniel did the same thing. Joseph has a way of interpreting things spiritually that other people don't. There are some people in the Old Testament that were incredibly insightful as far as in a New Testament kind of way, in the sense that they truly understood God's providence and God's working things out to his benefit and his purpose. And I brought up Daniel. Why do I say Daniel? Talk about another righteous character in the Old Testament. You know, we like to talk about people's flaws in the Old Testament all the time. Certainly, you know, there's a time and a place to do that, but there are some incredibly righteous people in the Old Testament as well. And two up the top of the list would be Joseph here and Daniel. Anybody remember Daniel's prayer in Daniel chapter 5? And before we mention Daniel's prayer, think about Daniel's situation. How old was Daniel when he got taken captive to Babylon? We don't know, but he was a teenager. He had to be a teenager because we can do the math, and he couldn't have been more than 17 years old when he got taken captive. What's the first thing that happens when he gets to Babylon? Make him a eunuch. Never sees Jerusalem again. Now he's a eunuch. What does his name get changed to? Belteshazzar. What does that mean? Bel, one of the Babylonian gods, protect his life. And if that doesn't hit home with you, think of it this way. What if you got taken captive and your captives decided from now on you shall be Muhammad? In chapter 1 of the book of Daniel, what did he not want to do that was expected of him. He begged the captain of the guard not to make him do it. King's dainties. Why, I suppose he didn't want to eat the king's dainties. It's all unclean food according to the Hebrew diet, most likely, and it's all been sacrificed to the Babylonian gods. Daniel recognized that he did not want to do that. It would defile him to do that. And on top of that, I'll make you a deal. You leave me alone to eat my vegetables, and I'll guarantee you I'll be as healthy and fat and plump, or whatever term I forget that's used in there, as anybody else that's been eating the king's dainties. And God held true to that. So anyways, point being, every way you could be seemingly on the surface cursed, Daniel was cursed. Because he didn't, none of that should have came upon him. And by the way, why did he get thrown into the den of lions again?
Well, he failed to, they tricked him basically into, any time that he didn't pray to the king, that, he'd be thrown into prison. So pray to anyone other than the king.
Right. 30-day period. No one prays to anyone other than the king for 30 days. What did Daniel immediately do? Went home, opened his window towards Jerusalem, and as his custom was, prayed 3 times that day. Well, they were setting him up for that, so he gets thrown in the lion's den. Well, what's the point? Daniel spent a night with the lions because he would not give up on prayer. That's how faithful to God he was, and yet what did it cost him? He got thrown in the lion's den. Now, I don't know what kind of faith Daniel had before he got thrown in there. But I'm sure that once the lions didn't attack him, I'm sure he would have recognized that as the God working for him. But still, that was the threat hanging over his head. All he did was pray to his God like he always does. Point being, every way you could interpret life as being against you, Daniel could have made an argument. Daniel could have been one of those people that said, well, that's nothing. Let me tell you what happened to me. Quit whining, Alex. Let me tell you what happened to me. Every way it could look like God's against you. It looked like it on the surface. But Daniel, one of the great things about that prayer to me is, actually I don't want to quote it. Let me read it instead. Look at Daniel chapter 9. One of the most amazing chapters in the book of Daniel. Chapter 9 in the book, all the Old Testament, as a matter of fact. We'll pick it up in the middle of his prayer, Daniel 9. Let's read verse 8. O Lord, to us belongs shame of face, to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To the Lord our God belongs mercy and forgiveness, though we have rebelled against him. We've not obeyed the voice of the Lord our God to walk in his laws, which he set before us by his servants the prophets. And here's your key verse. Yet, yes, all Israel has transgressed your law and has departed so as not to obey your voice. Therefore the curse and the oath written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out on us, because we have sinned against him. Now, what do you suppose it means, the curse and the oath written in the law of Moses? Deuteronomy chapter 28. Deuteronomy 28 and 29, Moses takes Israel and puts them on 2 different mountains. Mount Gerizim, where 6 tribes shouted out the blessings of God, and Mount Ebal, where 6 tribes shouted out the cursings of God. And that's the chapter, to kind of jog your memory, where Moses said, or God said through Moses, if you keep my commandments and walk in my statutes, I will bless you when you rise up, bless you when you lay down, I'll bless you in the city, bless you in the country. I'll bless your kneading bowl, I'll bless your field. Just 1,000 ways you'll be blessed. In verse 14, he turns around and says just the opposite. If you do not follow my law and obey my commandments and my statutes, I will curse you. Cursed will you be when you rise up. Cursed will you be when you lay down. Cursed will you be in the city. Cursed will you be in the country. On and on and on he goes with the curses. Guess what? One of the things Daniel does while he's in captivity. Reads the law of Moses. He reads Deuteronomy 28 and 29. By the way, it's not the only place you can see that, but that's the best place to see it. But he reads Deuteronomy 28 and 29. He looks at his own life. Here I am in Babylonian captivity. I got taken captive. Nothing personal, Daniel. I told the generation of Moses what was going to happen. And they did exactly what I told them not to do. And now the punishment that I told them, and by the way, the punishment is described to a T in the book of Deuteronomy. Punishment that Daniel experienced 800 years later had long been written by the law of Moses. And Daniel recognized that, well, this is the curse of the law of Moses. So while some people would have taken everything that happened to Daniel personally as though God were against him, what have I done wrong? We like to play those games when we're going through periods of adversity, but Daniel knew, no, it's not me. I'm faithful to the Lord. It's the fact that we did not obey the law of Moses. By the way, as long as we read it, let me go ahead and make a comment on that. We picked up verse 8, but he also says the same thing in verse 7. O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but to us shame of face, as it is this day. O Lord, to us belongs shame of face, verse 8. Twice he said, we should be ashamed of ourselves. I was in a room one time, and I bet it was 20 years ago at least, maybe 25. There's a woman sitting in a room listening to me, and I made the statement, we should be ashamed of ourselves. She came up to me afterwards, and she said, I'll never look at you the same again. And I'm like, well, that said, it was even controversial. Huh? Shame. You said we should be ashamed of ourselves. She said, shame is the worst. I cannot believe you think shame has any value. You know what I immediately said to her? Should Adolf Hitler have been ashamed of himself? You know what she said? I don't know. And I said, now that we've established that shame has a place, all we have to do is figure out when God said we should be ashamed and when we should not be ashamed. Now, in her defense, I have a feeling that there are a lot of people who are raised in households where parents will guilt and shame you to manipulate you. And you grow up and become an adult and you've experienced that all your life. It leaves a poor taste in your mouth about shame. And so when you start hearing people talk about being ashamed, it brings up bad memories. And I kind of understood that about probably, I didn't know her that well, but I'm guessing that's probably where she came from. But I was listening to Glenn Beck one day, former Mormon, or actual Mormon, listening to Glenn Beck one day, and he made this statement. And at first I agreed with it, but I don't agree with it anymore. He said, here in America we are experiencing the death of shame. And he's talking about, sins that people used to do at midnight around the corner where no one could see them. They're doing on Main Street at high noon these days. We are experiencing the death of shame. And at first I kind of agreed with that. But today I have changed my position. You know what my position is? No, shame has changed its address. Guess who's supposed to be ashamed of themselves in this world that we live in now? Us. We're the ones that are supposed to be ashamed of ourselves. Have you heard what one of the candidates running for Texas governor said about religion? If a guy like me, in his world, if he had the power to do it, he'd do it tomorrow. If a guy like me will not marry a same-sex couple, we should lose our tax-exempt status. You know what the next step is, don't you? The next step is it'll either be considered a mental illness or it'll be illegal. You go to jail. Now what's my point? We're supposed to be ashamed of ourselves. Shame hadn't left town, just moved. People try to argue Christians should be ashamed of themselves all the time. I hear it all the time. You're against same-sex marriage? Homophobe. They're trying to shame you. No, I'm just following God's word. But the point is, shame and guilt are actually two of God's greatest tools. Why are they good tools, not bad tools? Yeah. Now, I don't know that this is a good technical definition, but it works for me. I'll pass it on to you. What's the difference between guilt and shame? I think guilt is what I feel inside when I know what I've done, but nobody else does. I feel it in here, guilt. Shame is what I feel when others know, or, when I contemplate God knowing.
Like King David.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know that that's a real technical definition, but that's kind of the way I look at it. But still, shame and guilt are good motivators. You look at your past behavior, you're ashamed of it, that should motivate you to not behave that way anymore. And they are, one of the problems I think in the world is we struggle sometimes to discern between a blessing and a cursing. Near as I can tell, here's the law of blessings and cursings. You ready for this one? If something happens to you and you're smiling, it's a curse. If something happens to you and you go, ouch, that hurt, it's a blessing. And I'm almost not kidding. People do not know how to assess blessings and cursings. They don't. Sometimes the very best things that happen to you in life began in pain, began in shame, began in guilt. It motivated you to become a better person. If something takes you from a lost person to a God-conscious and hopefully a saved person, I don't know how you could call that anything but a blessing. Might not look like a blessing at first. Wish I could remember the story, and I don't know enough of it. I'd type it into the computer because I'll bet you I could pull it up. I heard a great story one time, and I can only half tell it. But I think I can tell enough that you'll understand the point that the author was making. But he said something about a couple farmers living in a town, and it's during the Civil War. And one farmer comes over to visit the other farmer, and he says, hey, how's it going? He said, well, my oldest son got drafted. He's off to fight the war. And the farmer said, well, that's a curse. My son is still at home helping me on the farm. And that guy said, and he said, I'm blessed. And that guy said, well, maybe. See, that's what I mean. I'm not telling the story very well. But anyways, let's see, how does it go? And I can't tell the story well enough. That's why I would like to Google it. But the point he was making was, every time something happens, we immediately label it as either a blessing or a cursing based on whether we like the way it sounds or not. Or whether, I got a raise or, something like that. If we like it, God blesses us. If we don't like it, God curses us. But God has a funny way of taking situations that seem like a curse when it happens. And yet, when I look back on it, I say to myself, well, that's actually turned out to be a blessing. And if I can ever find that story, I'll share it with you. But as I just proved to myself, I can't say it well enough to get the point across. But blessings and cursings are not as easy to discern as we think they are. Some of the, what I would have called the worst things in my life turned out to be pretty good blessings because they got me moving in the right direction. But anyways, Joseph is a blessed man, but you certainly wouldn't know that on the surface by the things that are happening. We got a few minutes. Let's go ahead and start chapter 40. Came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker, the king of Egypt, offended. Let me try that again. It came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Now, we're not told exactly what they did, but Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker, so he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. You think that's an accident? One of the things that's pretty clear in the story of Joseph is the providence of God. God is working behind the scenes, making things happen that you would not expect. Connections. I'll give you another one. Anybody remember in book of Acts, after Paul has appealed his case to Caesar, they are, I think he's in Caesarea and needs to be taken up to Jerusalem to be tried. And I think it's about 40 Jews come together and take a vow, we will not eat till he's dead. Remember that, sir? Who happened to hear that?
Paul's nephew.
Paul's nephew just happened to be standing there. Hey, I'd like to speak to my uncle if you don't mind. He goes in and visits Paul. Next thing you know, Paul's got an armed escort up to Jerusalem. God's providence. God has a way of working things out, even in what looks like the darkest of situations. Verse 4, and the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, so they were in custody for a while. Then the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, dreamed a dream. Both of them, each man's dream in one night. Each man's dream with its own interpretation. And Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of the Lord's house, saying, why do you look so sad today? And they said to him, we each have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. Now, why do you suppose Joseph wants to hear these dreams? He's already done this. It's not a new thing for Joseph. What did he do to begin with? He saw his sheaves, or his brother's sheaves, bowing down to his sheaves. He saw Jacob and his wife, and all of Israel bowing down to Joseph. But I'll tell you what I really like about verse 8. And actually, I thought I had it written in the margin of my Bible, but I don't. But I do think of the same name every time I read chapter 40 and verse 8. Do not interpretations belong to God? You know what I think of every time I read that passage? Hello, Sigmund Freud. I mean that sincerely. Anybody had powerful dreams in their life? I wonder what that means. I still have a dream from when I was 32. I remember it, and I think I know what it means. And I don't think it was an accidental dream. But there's a far cry between what I just said, which is, I had a profound dream. I think I know what it means, but I don't. Think I do, but I don't. Why don't I? Because the interpretations of a dream belong to God, and He did not tell me what it means. Woke me up, never forgot it. Maybe one day I'll talk about it, but anyways, it was a profound dream, and I do believe that I kind of got the message, but I don't know for sure, and none of us does know for sure. You can have a dream. And I was also thinking this afternoon, anybody see the movie Abraham Lincoln? Steven Spielberg movie? Didn't he have a dream about how his life was going to end? I think he did. He called it a premonition. I forget exactly how the movie described his dream now, but basically came to the conclusion that whatever it was he dreamed, it meant he wasn't going to live forever. For very long, I guess I should say. But it's one thing to have a profound dream and to wake up and scratch your head and wonder, does this mean something? Is God communicating to me in some way? But it's another thing to say, oh yeah, I had a dream, and here's what it means. It doesn't work that way. The interpretations of a dream belong to God. But since God has already interpreted dreams for him, he decides that he can go ahead and listen to their dreams. Then the chief butler, verse 9, told his dream to Joseph and said to him, behold, in my dream a vine was before me. In the vine were 3 branches. It was as though it budded. Its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed them in Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift lift up your head and restore you to your place. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner when you were his butler. But remember me when all is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. Now we generally, I've got that passage highlighted, and we generally highlight it and remember it for what we know is about to happen, which is the butler does not remember him. But something else occurs to me with that verse. What difference does it make if you tell Pharaoh?
Well, at that point in time, probably may have been not as significant as it's about to be, because God's about to.
Well, here's what I'm getting at. I think everybody knows Joseph is innocent. If you've been, put you in prison, as they say, lock him up, throw away the key. Why do you think tell Pharaoh I'm in here is going to help you in the least bit? Well, but I also think because on some level, Joseph expects that people know he didn't do what he was accused of. Doesn't make sense to me that he would appeal to Pharaoh, because Pharaoh, you're a rapist, where you belong. But he didn't see it that way. He almost acts like he expects that will carry weight with Pharaoh. Remember, he hasn't interpreted Pharaoh's dreams yet.
I think the biggest thing is it didn't fit into God's plan at that.
Yeah.
Delay doesn't mean denial. He's working things out, so his timing is perfect.
Romans 15:4 again comes to mind. These things were written for our learning, that through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures we may have hope. Again, first time I read that passage, I understood what they were saying, but what constantly perplexed me is, why throw the word patience into that verse? Why don't you just say, these things were written for our learning, that through the comfort of the Scriptures we may have hope? Why does he add the word patience? And Charles just hit it right there. Yeah, you're right, he is innocent. And he's been being treated as a guilty man for a long time now. God hadn't quite worked out what it is he's working out. He's with him, but he's not ready to have him released. Let's go ahead and finish the chapter, and then we'll call it a night. Verse 15, for indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me in the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I also was in my dream, and there I had 3 white baskets on my head. We've all seen the pictures of Africans walking with baskets on their head. Egyptian hieroglyphics show that is the case as far as how they used to transport things. It's in keeping with accuracy. In the uppermost basket, there were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head. So Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation of it, the 3 baskets of 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you. Now that's bad enough all by itself, but what do we know about Egyptians and their view of the afterlife?
They believe there is an afterlife.
Packed everything in the sarcophagus with them. What else do we know about Egyptian and the way they treated the dead?
Well, the animals were sacred. A lot of different animals were sacred. Every animal.
Let me ask a more direct question. Did they believe in embalming?
Oh, yeah.
Big time. You know why? Because the better preserved your body was, the better off you were in the afterlife. What's the baker just been told? You won't have a body in the afterlife. Birds are going to eat your body. So obviously, just on the surface, knowing you're going to die in 3 days is bad enough. But you're not even going to be embalmed, and you're not even going to be prepared for the afterlife in the way that Egyptians thought of the afterlife. So that was a significantly horrific sentence for the baker. Verse 20. Now it came to pass on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. He lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. And although that passage always, breaks my heart the way it does yours, the way Butler said it today, I had never quite read it the way he did, and I think it's pretty significant. I wish I could find it real quick, the way he actually quoted it, and I'm not going to be able to do it very well, but I don't want to ask the question as we get ready to go home for the night. Kind of put it the way he did. You know what he considers to be one of the greatest of all sins? And by the way, Butler is a commentary that I respect, that I'm reading to prepare for this class. One of the greatest sins, as far as he's concerned, that you can, oh, by the way, what a perfect night to say this. The greatest of all sins, ingratitude. And I've said what a perfect night to say this because I forgot I got to fill out my pumpkin here. What are we grateful for? I am a true believer that I don't care what's going on in your life, you ought to be able to manufacture gratitude at a moment's notice. Man, one thing after another happens, my life is falling apart, this is miserable. And yeah, I understand everything that's happened to you. I'd feel the same way you do if that was going on in my life. But are you grateful? Your answer better be yes. Because if your answer is not yes, you're in trouble. Why should you be grateful? Because what's the greatest problem every last one of us has? And this is a good way to close out the night. It's the greatest fear every last one of us has. We have to die. No, we don't. No, we don't. We have to pass through death on our way to life eternal. God has already solved our biggest problem. And he will solve any other problem eventually. Not in our time, because we're going to need patience, but he will solve it. All right, thank you for coming out here. And Charles, thanks for working so hard to get us online. I'm not sure how much you didn't get tonight, guys, but our internet service has been iffy around here at the building here lately, and we're not exactly sure why. It's not us. It's just internet. But big thank you to Kevin, who has struck again. He put.
I apologize for the. I was thinking our doorknobs for some reason were silver, not chrome, so I got the wrong color.
I hadn't noticed. I noticed they were new, but that's why I was grateful, because I could barely get my key in that lock over there, and now it works like butter. But anyways, Kevin is very professional. And
the doors too, and he'll do the front doors maybe next week.
Oh, okay. He's not going to be back tomorrow? Okay. But yeah, he's been doing a bang-up job. We are grateful he came our way. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Lord God in heaven, we are thankful for this hour that we could spend studying from the life of Joseph, and may we learn from the life of Joseph that if we have faith, we know that you are with us, Father, for walking in the light. And although we would love our steps, as Job once said, to be bathed in oil, we also know that sometimes they won't be. Sometimes we will go through seasons of adversity, and sometimes those seasons will last much longer than we feel like we can endure. But we know that you are with us, and we know that eventually you will turn our sorrow into joy. And we thank you that we can learn this lesson from the book of Genesis, and we're grateful for Joseph and the example that he set and how to live your lives in times of adversity. We're grateful for this hour, Father. May we all get home safely and in peace. Please bring us back at the next appointed time. And please be with those who are physically sick in this congregation. Heal them and restore them. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, thank you for tuning in.
Dismiss, while Michelle's still here, the ladies. The request is made that for the ladies that provide money for the meat for the Thanksgiving dinner, rather than placing that cost on certain individuals, which is some practice in my previous congregation. We did that actually for every fellowship meal. Church always gave money for the major ham, whatever it be, but anyway, the request was for the Thanksgiving dinner, so since Stanley and Mike and Eddie are here, me, and I, recommend that we do so. And get Mike to cut a check and give to the ladies for that. Michelle, did y'all have a particular amount in mind on that, or? I'd say at least $100, if not. Would that be sufficient, or need more?
I was gonna eat $100 worth of it. If you're still listening online, we just took a vote that, the church will pick up the meat for the Thanksgiving Day meal. So that has been passed. We will get a check to, who do we need to get a check to? Janice? Okay, we'll get a check to you, Janice, if you're listening online, but yeah, we're gonna do that. Anyway, we'll go ahead and close for the night. God bless you, and we'll see the men Saturday, hopefully. If not, we'll see you here on Sunday morning for Bible study and worship.